Hello and welcome to A Critical Dragon, where I talk about narrative in film, television, and in books. And today I want to talk about Midnight Tides and a scene in chapter 10. So this is going to be spoilers for Midnight Tides, spoilers just for Midnight Tides, not the rest of the books. In fact, I'm not even referring to anything from any other book. But the scene that I want to talk about is in chapter 10. It is a scene involving Tehol, Beddict, Ublala, Pung, and Bug. And the reason I want to talk about this is one of those scenes that frequently in fan discussions or discussions of the book comes up as one of those scenes that a lot of readers struggle with, that they think it strikes a bum note or isn't treated as sensitively as the subject maybe deserves. So I'm going to go through the scene and talk about some of the criticisms of the scene, and I want to talk about the textual evidence that actually answers a lot of the criticisms. But I also want to talk about some metatextual stuff that should shed some light on it as well. So let's start with the scene. Tehol swung round and approached Ublala Pung. Most beloved bodyguard, whatever is wrong? Red-rimmed eyes stared up at him. You're not interested. Not really. Nobody is. Of course I'm interested. Bug, I'm interested, aren't I? It's my nature, isn't it? Absolutely, master. Most of the time. It's the women, isn't it, Ublala? I can tell. The huge man nodded miserably. Are they fighting over you? He shook his head. Have you fallen for one of them? That's just it. I haven't had a chance to. Tehol glanced over at Bug, then back to Ublala. You haven't had a chance to? What a strange statement. Can you elaborate? It's not fair. That's what it is. Not fair. You won't understand. It's not a problem you have. I mean, what am I? Am I be nothing but a toy just because I have a big hold on a moment? Tehol cut in. Let's see if I fully understand you, Ublala. You feel they're just using you, interested only in your attributes. All they want from you is sex. No commitment, no loyalty even. They're happy taking turns with you, taking no account of your feelings, your sensitive nature. They probably don't even want to cuddle afterwards or make small talk, right? Ublala nodded. And all that is making you miserable. He nodded again, snuffling, his lower lip protruding, his broad mouth downturned at the corners, a muscle twitching in his right cheek. Tehol stared for a moment longer. Then he tossed up his hands. Ublala, don't you understand? You're in a man's paradise, what all the rest of us can only dream about. But I want something more. No, you don't. Trust me. Bug, don't you agree? Tell him. Bug frowned, then said, It is as Tehol says, Ublala. Granted a tragic truth, and granted master's nature is to revel in tragic truths, which to many might seem unusual, unhealthy even. Thanks for the affirmation, Bug, Tehol interrupted with a scowl. Go clean up, will you? He faced Ublala again. You are at the pinnacle of male achievement, my friend. Wait, did you say it's not a problem I have? What do you mean by that? Ublala blinked. What? Are you at that pinnacle or whatever you called it? Are you at it too? Bug snorted. He hasn't been at it in months. So that's the scene. That's the scene that causes consternation with a number of readers. And part of it is this is a scene dealing with a topic that rarely comes up in fantasy, that of a male character being sexually exploited by female characters. And because it involves Tehol, there is an absurdist element to how Tehol is dealing with it. Because of that, there is a feeling that the tone doesn't match the seriousness of the subject matter. And that's quite obvious. Almost all of the scenes with Tehol are absurd comedy, and yet this is quite a serious matter. So why do we single this scene out as something that Tehel's absurdism is inappropriate because we've dealt with slavery, we've dealt with people being murdered, we've dealt with people, entire tribes being wiped out. And Tehol has treated all of them the same way with this absurdity. But this is the one that trips people up. So let's go through a couple of things about the accusations that this is not being taken seriously. For a start, the fact that it is included in the text shows there's at least some consideration of the seriousness of this. Secondly, the fact that this is included in the text and it is a rarity for the sexual objectification of men to be dealt with in military fantasy or epic fantasy ever in the genre, that's another point to take into consideration. And the third is, even within the scene, one of the characters calls out that what Tehol has just said is unusual and unhealthy. So there is a blatant and overt comment by one of the characters in the scene immediately after the declaration that is warning the reader, is a signal to the reader. Tehol is not necessarily being serious in what he is saying here. And that is our first overt clue. The second overt clue follows almost immediately afterwards, because as soon as as Tehol and Bug leave and they go to meet Shirk Alal, Bug says, "You should be more sympathetic to Ublala, master," Bug said over a shoulder. "He's a very unhappy man." Again, Bug, the divine figure, is stepping in to overtly state a criticism of how Tehol has spoken to Ublala. So we have two overt criticisms of the manner in which Tehol has spoken to someone. They're in the text. The author has included this in the text. These are, I believe, clear signposts that we're not meant to agree necessarily with what Tehol has said. Now, the next thing to consider is who Ublala is and who Tehol is. Tehol does not treat anything seriously. He is always flippant. He is always facetious. But Ublala is a man-child. He has quite an innocent, naive, and limited intellectual faculty. And because of that, Tehol's strategy here, which we don't necessarily have to agree with, but his strategy here is to take something that this man-child is upset about and try to convince him that the thing that he's upset about, he should actually be happy about, because that will have the effect of stopping him crying, stopping him being upset, making him feel better. It would actually fix that aspect of the problem, because the immediate problem is Ublala is upset. And even though Ublala is just a servant, he is not one of Tehol's friends. The fact that Ublala is not someone that Tehol has spent a lot of time with. He is a relatively new employee. Tehol takes time to try to reassure Ublala in terms that Ublala will understand. So as readers, we have to be aware not only of who Tehol is, but who Ublala is, and stop projecting our need for how this should be relayed and treated in our world onto a situation that is actually radically different. But even then, for the idea that Tehol does not take this seriously, does not take Ublala's complaint seriously, if we skip on to chapter 14, in chapter 14, so four chapters later, Tehol is addressing the three women who have caused Ublala to be upset. And he says, "Ublala's departure is the cause for all this despondence?" Tehol shook his head. "My dears, you did indeed drive him away." He paused, then added with great pleasure, "because none of you was willing to make a commitment, a disgusting display of self-serving objectification, atrocious behavior by each and every one of you." So Admittedly, when Tehol is speaking to Ublala, he doesn't mention this. But clearly, this is what Tehol thinks. And again, it is overt and it's in the book. And this is one of the difficulties that we have with close reading is when we take a section out of a text and we analyze that section and we look at that section and we discuss that section, we always have to remember to put it back into the text and examine the context. And context here is incredibly important because in chapter 10, immediately following this exchange with Ublala, Tehol and Bug leave to go to see Shirk Alal. They then recruit Shirk Alal to partner with Ublala because Shirk needs a vigorous sexual partner to keep her going. Ublala needs a sexual partner who'll actually care about him, and Shirk is a good person. So Tehol matchmakes and sets the two of them up together and actually protects Ublala from the three women who have been abusing him. Now, admittedly, he doesn't call attention to this deed. He doesn't explain that he is doing the right thing. He doesn't crow about it. He doesn't virtue signal what he is doing. He just does it. And this actually is true to Tehol's character. If we recall, in chapter 4, when Tehol is speaking to Breeze, it is explicitly referenced that Tehol keeps a ridiculous outward appearance of being destitute, despite being ridiculously wealthy. This is also remarked upon when Shand and the other two meet with Tehol to get him in on their scheme. It is revealed that Tehol, without Hull knowing, has purchased these islands to relocate the devastated tribes that Hull was inadvertently involved in their devastation in order to correct Hull's mistake. That he has spent thousands upon thousands of the Letheri currency setting up an underground railroad to protect these people. But none of it is advertised. It is all good that is done in secret. He isn't virtue signaling. He isn't crowing about his accomplishments. He isn't saying the right thing. He is doing the right thing. And he is doing it all in secret. We also learn that when an unscrupulous lender tried to take advantage of Tehol's family, Tehol set up a business, did some unscrupulous things, basically got a hold over his tutor so his tutor wouldn't rat him out when he skipped school. Set up a business, curried favor with powerful people, paid off the debt, and then had those people call in debts on the lender that tried to ruin his family. Again, he does the right thing, but does it in secret. Breeze even says that he doesn't understand his brother. His brother is smart and is almost serpentine in how he thinks. And he doesn't make his plans clear to other people. So we have multiple chapters where we know that Tehol projects an outward appearance of not caring. He dresses in rags despite the fact he is one of the wealthiest people in the city. He pretends to be a fool. He pretends to be an idiot. He pretends to have only ever been lucky when we know he is a genius. He pretends not to care about people. This is all an affectation that we have seen in chapter after chapter after chapter of Tehol's interactions. And yet suddenly when we get to this chapter, in chapter 10, people forget all of those different aspects and go, but he should have treated Ublala nicer. If he had been extraordinarily sensitive in that moment, we might have been assuaged because it would correspond to a moral and cultural awareness that we currently have. But it would have been radically out of character for Tehol. But despite that, Erikson still included a criticism of how Tehol handles the subject through the character of Bug. What is even more interesting here is that Ublala himself, while he's an interesting character, is very much a meta-commentary on the sexual objectification of characters in fantasy. Now, admittedly, if you look up sexual objectification of characters in fantasy, you will get 99.99% of the articles returning about female characters, because it is a problem in a lot of fantasy with an internalized male gaze and the sexual objectification of female characters. So with this series, we know that a lot of the concepts that are common in fantasy are being addressed. They are being subverted. They are being deconstructed. That's a lot of what Erikson set out to do with the Malazan Book of the Fallen, and we have seen it in multiple books thus far. So when it comes to Ublala, he is a sexually objectified character, but it's a he this time. Why choose a male character? Because it is overt and doesn't have the internalized male gaze of the sort of the Western media bias that we have. It doesn't have that to protect it. It challenges that very assumption. People sometimes forget how internalized the male gaze is, how internalized the sexual objectification of female characters is in fantasy. And one of the ways to challenge that, one of the ways to actually raise awareness of it, you can do it in one of two ways. You can take a female character and speak overtly about it, or you can take a male character and apply all of the same things, all of the same tropes, all of the same styles of description, all of the same attitudes, and it will stand out because our internal bias does not inure us from it. And so when we have the constant fixation on Ublala's accoutrement, his attributes, we go, why is this constantly there? Why is it constantly being talked about? And yet these self-same readers would constantly ignore or overlook the number of times the heaving bosom or the breasts or the hips of a female character are being discussed. It is only by challenging our assumptions that we become aware of our bias. Now, not every reader has this bias or has the bias to the same degree. And maybe you personally didn't need that in the text. But one of the things that we always have to remember is texts are not written individually for us. They are written for an audience of which we are a part. And because of that, it's not about what you specifically need. It's about a conversation with an audience, not the individual members of that audience. And so maybe you didn't need this section. Maybe you didn't need that trope discussed. Maybe in the 15 years, 20 years since this book was published, the genre has moved on. But remember, the genre needed to move on. This is a book of its time dealing with the genre as it was at the time. One of the last things that I want to discuss is the fact that a big theme in this series is the idea of witnessing, of the importance of witnessing, and how great events can still be great events when they are unwitnessed. This theme and concept of the importance of witnessing is at play here. Here we have a character who does great things, good things, but does them in secret, unwitnessed. The reader is the witness. The character might have all of this flim-flam, all of this flamboyance, all of this deception that they are projecting in the diegetic reality. But we as reader are able to pierce that veil. We are able to look beyond that illusion. We see that Tehol acts immediately to protect Ublala. We see that he protects Ublala from the three women. He gets Shirk involved to protect Ublala. He gets both Ublala and Shirk together so that they can both take care of their own individual needs. And he does all of this without fanfare. Erikson trusts us as readers to put it together. In chapter 2, we get an introduction of who Tehol is, how he operates. We should be aware of that as a character. In chapter 4, we get further information which confirms that he does things in secret, that he is a good man deep down inside, but that he has plans within plans and doesn't reveal them. And he treats everyone facetiously and flippantly. We see this time and time again in the book. Erikson trusts that he has given us all of the pieces we need so that when we get to this scene, we understand Tehol's heart is in the right place. The first thing he needs to do is calm Ublala down, to make Ublala feel better, to try and take some of the hurt and the pain away. That's what he tries to do. The second thing he does is leave to recruit Shirk so that Ublala will be protected, someone will care for Ublala, and will actually make Ublala happy. The third thing is he castigates the three women who did this to Ublala and overtly calls out their behavior. So I think the combination of all of these things shows that not only does Erikson treat this subject seriously, that not only is this challenging our assumptions, but it also shows the danger of superficial reading and of not paying attention to character depth, of not paying attention to subtext, and to selectively cherry picking pieces of evidence instead of looking at the context and the content as a whole. But I hope that you have enjoyed this discussion. This book is a great book. And sure, there are always things that we as readers can wish were done differently. But just because we would like something done differently doesn't mean that the thing was done badly. And quite often, when something sticks out in a text as, this doesn't seem to fit with the other things, that is almost always, not always, but almost always, a signal that maybe we personally, as readers, have missed something and we need to think about it. Now, authors can miscommunicate, but readers can misread. It's a two-way street. And we always have to do our part to make sure that we've dotted our I's and crossed our T's. But thank you very much for watching. Thank you for your continued support, and I will see you in the next one.